Okay, people, so I've just watched a few clips of the series which is shown on ABC, well, segments. It's called What Would You Do? If you haven't seen it before, I'd strongly recommend it. It makes very interesting viewing. Basically, they set up these situations whereby people are judged in a public setting for their lifestyle choices, for their ethnicity, for a range of reasons. Um, People find themselves in certain difficult situations. The whole idea is to see public reactions, if people would intervene or not in American society. And more often than not, people do. Shows one thing I think about American society. There's a lot of good people out there who are chivalrous minded, generous minded, and so on. Forgive me if I have a bit of a slur, I've got a mouth ulcer at the moment. Anyway, the reason I mention that is one particular episode I saw. It leads me on to another subject, which is the Tiger Mom phenomenon. If you see that episode, it's worth watching. Basically, in it, by the way, these segments are about 7-8 minutes long. They're not very long, so they're worth watching if you find any of them. But basically, in that segment, it showed the Tiger Mum, and all these people are actors, by the way, pretending to be the people involved. But quite often they have personal experience of the situation. Yeah, so in one episode it shows this Tiger Mum in a sort of public eating area, really laying into her little girl, calling her stupid, saying she's lazy, and this and that. And a lot of other people there, especially the women, really take issue with this, and they confront the woman and tell her she's terrible and she needs to lay off the kid and so on. Only one person defended Tiger Mum, which was interestingly a middle-aged Asian man. So, if you're not familiar with this phenomenon, the Tiger Mum, it was promoted in large part by an author called Amy Chua, who's once again in the headlines. This time for a book she's just published, which describes how America can compete with the rest of the world through looking at the most successful ethnic groups in America, the 8 most successful ethnic groups: Chinese American, Indian American, Nigerian American. She lists a number of other ethnic groups she believes are the most successful in terms of superior intelligence, quote unquote. Frankly, I have very little time for Amy Chua. I do take issue with a lot of her philosophy, and it's quite clear that a lot of that philosophy has blatant ethnocentrist overtones. And in this video I want to talk particularly about the Tiger Mum phenomenon. Firstly, one important thing to recognise is not every Asian parent has this sort of attitude. For a start, Asian is a very broad term. I mean, it's a continent, not a country, so that's something that has to be taken on board. But it is true to say that the education in many Asian countries, I've seen this firsthand, puts a lot of emphasis on a very strict upbringing, and a lot of that involves putting enormous pressure on children from a very young age to excel, to sort of standards whereby anything other than an A+, then you're a failure. This isn't an exaggeration, it definitely exists I've seen it firsthand in China. There's definitely a huge amount of pressure, and it is true to say there's differences in Eastern and Western culture in terms of attitudes towards this, but I just want to say from the outset, it would be wrong to say that Amy Chua and this Tiger Mum stereotype fits every single Asian mother. It's not the case. It's widespread, but it's not the case to say that that fits every Asian mother. But I'll tell you why I take issue with Amy Chua's philosophy. For a start, she patronizes every other mother as being a bad parent if they don't agree with her hardline philosophy. I actually see Amy Chua as an extremist, because there's no middle ground with her sort of outlook. She's published books whereby she's admitted to calling her own daughters garbage if they didn't reach her high standards. And I strongly believe that parents like this are just trying to live through their children. Yes, part of it may be motivated by they want to see their children successful, but I honestly believe it's an egomaniac thing. They're looking at themselves through their children, and they want people to judge their success through how they bring up their children. In other words, if their child doesn't perform academically well, then they believe that's a reflection on them. But what I take issue with is this assumption that Amy Chua has, that all Western parents are somehow lazy slackers who kind of wrap their children in cotton wool and don't have any sort of discipline. That's a stereotype that's equally cannot be used across the spectrum. There's plenty of Western parents who also take a strict method to parenting. So these racial stereotypes are very unhelpful to anyone, and all Amy Chua is doing is trying to reinforce ethnic stereotypes. She says she's trying to counter them, but actually all she's doing is enforcing them. But I do think there's racist overtones in a lot of her attitudes, especially towards white women, who she presents as bad mothers just because they don't agree with her approach. And I think that's definitely damaging. But another issue I take with her is, like I say, I do believe she's an extremist, because her approach actually robs children of childhood. Now, I'm aware her own daughters have defended her, but I still think that doesn't justify the sort of extreme attitude that she takes. By all means, you can have a strict upbringing, you can instill principles of discipline, and trying to encourage children to strive for academic success. But I really don't believe you have to belittle them and put them down and call them garbage and those really sort of hurtful terms. I really don't see any logic as to why those sort of that sort of attitude should be acceptable. And I really do believe that people who do use this Tiger Mom approach in Western countries should face Western consequences. As far as I'm concerned, it's child abuse. It goes beyond, trying to instill a sort of disciplined lifestyle. I really do believe there should be consequences for that, because the child has no say in it. It's very demoralizing language. I mean, think of what must go through. They say, oh well, if they don't get the A plus, then we will demoralize them until they do. But being a genius, being a super child, should not be the number one priority in the child's life. As far as I am concerned, the most important things for children are health, well-being, a healthy childhood, which means playing with other children, and learning right from wrong. Being a genius should not be the most important thing, so I think her priorities are wrong. But I also think it's incredibly arrogant of her to dictate what other parents should be like, and that's what she's doing. And frankly, she just fills the stereotype of the Far East gold-digging Asian dragon lady, which is probably an unfair stereotype, and I think there's a lot of Chinese women who don't fit that stereotype. So actually what Amy Chua is doing is reinforcing negative Asian stereotypes. And in the process, she's looking down at everyone else. She isn't a Sino-supremacist. I really do believe she believes Chinese people are the best people in the world. That makes her a racist. And when she makes this list of her preferred groups, that sort of thinking is actually what the Nazis done. It borders on eugenics, actually, and it is something very sinister about that. And I think she needs to face as much ridicule, as much... she needs to be challenged as much as possible. The way I see it, she's been given way too much of a free run by the media. She's just being given a free platform to spout out her dangerous ideology without being challenged face to face, saying, how do you justify this racist sort of attitude? She's just been given a free ride, and I think that's wrong. what I think I resent most about her philosophy is this assumption that anyone who doesn't agree with her is somehow, the sort of parent who just lets their child do what they want. Now that's equally, in my opinion, bad parenting. But why does it have to be one extreme or the other? What is wrong with balance? Now I'm not a father, but if I was, I already have a strong idea of the sort of attitude I would put forward. That would be one of balance. I would love my son and daughter unbelievably. And I would show them that love. And she says she demonstrates her love through this sort of method. Now I cannot say for an absolute fact she doesn't love her children. I can't read her mind. Maybe she does, and maybe her daughters believe that what she done was good for them. But I still think her philosophy is wrong. I still think she's promoting dangerous ethno-supremacist ideologies. I still think she is robbing children of childhood, and she's teaching people to believe that only by being a super success can you be an achievement in life. Not once in her philosophy does she preach compassion for people who are struggling. I honestly believe Amy Chua is the sort of person who would turn her nose up at homeless people because they don't fit her successful criteria. Frankly, she strikes me as a very cold-blooded and arrogant woman. She will of course deny that, and her supporters will deny it, but this image that she puts on, she brings it on herself. And it just pisses me off that she has this idea that you have to take that sort of approach in order to instill some sort of discipline. You can instill discipline, you can push your child to strive, but you don't have to do it in such a demoralizing manner. Anyway, back to my original point. I'm pleased to say in this video people did stand up to the Tiger Mom, who herself had been a victim of that. And she said that even though she believed in the philosophy, she admitted it brought back painful memories. So I think quite often people who promote this, that's true, they themselves have been through it. But to me, frankly, that's a bit like people who commit sexual abuse on children and they justify it because they themselves went through it. Now I'm not saying it's as bad as that. I'm certainly not comparing it in that way. But what I'm saying is just because they themselves have been through it doesn't justify it. In fact, I honestly believe it warps their thinking. It makes them think it's acceptable because they've been brainwashed into believing it's okay. This is not a healthy way to bring up a child. It's not a natural way. I don't care what anyone says. As far as I'm concerned, it's child abuse. And I strongly believe that Amy Chua should be investigated. I just think it's an extremist outlook to have. And why can't there be some balance? Yes, the other extreme is also bad, letting children do what they want and not putting your foot down and that sort of thing. Of course you need some discipline. And I feel equally resentful of those parents who just let their children do what they want, and when those children are badly behaved and they do things that are really bad, then the parent just says, oh, it's cute or whatever. That's equally bad. Now if my son or daughter for example insulted a stranger or something, I would definitely put my foot down and make it clear that that behaviour can't be tolerated. But what I resent about both arguments is they're just extreme. There's no middle ground with someone like Amy Chua. It's just push, 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 push. And frankly, I believe her philosophy is deeply damaging. It's damaging to the image of Asian Americans because it presents them as cold-blooded fanatics who just want their children to be like little supermen and superwomen. But it's also damaging to the model of parenting. Even some Asian, there's even been a reassessment within Asia, the Asian continent itself. I believe the Prime Minister of Malaysia said that he suggested that Malaysian mothers should tone it down a bit, that it's not the most important thing socially for the nation. To me it's just extremism, and that's all it is. I don't care if there's success stories from it. I still regard it as child abuse. Now, just to make my position clear, I'm not saying there's anything wrong. I have friends who do push their children to do well. There's nothing wrong with that. But I believe there are limits. And you have to let children have childhood. You have to let them enjoy life. What's the point of turning them into little mini geniuses if they then have no childhood? You're robbing an entire period of their life. So that's my stance on this issue.